Alright, this is a little lesson about a kind of word art I like to call word sculptures. Though a word sculpture is bubble letters that are all merged together into an intact single shape. So to write word sculptures, once you get really good at it, this is how they start to look. You write the bubble letters of the word sculptures, but to make it an intact one piece of material, here we're using paper, you got to just go on the underbelly of the word, and then once you get to the end, you have to fill in the overbelly, or the spine of the word. So I went ahead and did the underbelly, and I wanted you to see what it looks like to finish the words. So we got O, R, D. R, and ES is going to have to make an interior spot. A couple more interiors. And you can S-sculpt. Oh, I missed the L. You're going to need an L in there next time. But that's exactly why. You should probably write out the letters. Because it's enough of an effort to try to make the bubble letter in a row. So how would you do this if we didn't know how? W-O-R-D. W-O-R-D. So I like to think of it as putting a magnetic hair on the letters. So the first time you're starting out, you try to draw a line perpendicular to the shape. And then you can kind of coat the hair. And they start to dilate. So let's do it without the hair this time. Forgot the L again. So you can see the words pretty well. You'd want to just cross-hatch the interior. Notice how some of them aren't touching. We're going to have to merge them together. The end result, what we're after, is that we're going to cut these words out and then have floating shapes. So working in paper, which is a very thin, flimsy material, I'm going to point out how we got locations that are weak. Very weak there, there, and there. And there. How could we make them any better? Well, notice how on this one I gave it this much strength. And notice how on this one I gave it 2 overlaps. 2 overlaps is always enough. 1 overlap is asking for trouble. There's not really a good way to overlap the E, R, and the E right there. If you wanted to, you could do letters that are slightly diagonal. And you're going to want the overlaps to leave this kind of looking bump, because if you just make it seamless, you're not going to see that they're two distinct shapes that are just melted together a bit. So you see how if you worked at it, you could make it so that all of your borders are double. Here's the T. See, look how far the T has to. And now we're kind of committed to this diagonal. So now the P doesn't want to cross over very easily. So this would start. I kind of invented this because I was working in metal with like a plasma cutter or an oxyacetylene torch, and I'd want to cut out letters in to make kind of signs out of metal. So just using a piece of chalk, I would draw this on the metal and then cut it out. So what else is there to know? Let's just try the whole alphabet. So you know, lowercase. This J is tough. How are we going to do a J? H-I... Q... There's the lower line of the whole alphabet. Here we run into a problem of what do we do with floaters? How are we going to put the 0 right there, right there? You could do it like this. Sometimes there's a trick where if you have a TI like that, you might be able to get away with floating the dot connected to the letter next to it. So think about that, because in a metal sculpture you have no choice but to connect everything. J, K. This KL combo should have been put together right there. And then this, where's the Y gonna go? Y should have been connected right there. The Y is writing kind of tall. And you go back for your interior shapes. So that's the basic gist of how to do word sculptures. The last trick I'll show you is, let me write my name, cut it out for you. So you can always refine it before you do your final cut. There's a tendency to veer up or down, or to shrink. I think this veered down and shrank, so it might be good to set up your ceiling and your floor so that you don't veer too much. So I want to show you how to make refined versions of it. When you're cutting, you really want to cut the bottom off, then the top off, and then you want to go for the interior shapes. That's just a kind of the economy, or the ergonomics of it, the efficiency of cutting. And also for the mess, you want as least pieces of individual scrap as possible for cleanup. Don't feel you have to stick to the exact location of the line, because you're constantly refining the exactness that you're shooting for. Interior shapes are easily poked or folded and snipped. That was a poke. You could fold it right there and go for a snip. Okay, so we got a shape, but as you see, it's it's messy because you can see all these lines, and the lines didn't exactly get inherited; they were just guides. So the trick, in my opinion, is you want a perfect clean version. That's kind of hard to do with permanent marker, which bleeds through the paper, but I'll show you anyway. You're going to turn it over, and then you're going to copy it on the backwards. By copying it backwards, the other side is going to look unblemished. That is, if you're using a pen that doesn't bleed through. Or colored paper. It is super impossible to draw these bubble letters backwards. You're just not intuitive. So you gotta use your forwards version. See, now if this was one of those high quality pens that does not bleed, you could cut it out and then flip it over and have a very good looking copy of your name. So these pieces of paper, if you are using cardstock, they can be made into mobile hanger and string. You could have a bunch of pieces of paper, maybe reinforced with a little stick or wire. They can just float in mid-air. If you're going to make name tags for your class, this is one way to do it. Or desk placards. It is super fun to do this with the transparent colored plastic that folders are often made of. Just in my spare time subbing a sped class, I was able to just bring in some scrap folders in the truck from during lunchtime and create everyone's name in the classroom, and then come back subbing a couple weeks later and they were still on the tables because the teacher liked them so much. So you have to put your fingers on either side of the stabbing so that you don't distort the entry point. Or you can do the fold. Last poke, and we'll take a look, see if it looks any better on the flip side. They have a psychology test where you look at some, like Elvis's face upside down, like Gestalt psychology. You look at Elvis's face upside down and his eyes are flipped, and you don't notice that the eyes are flipped. But then if you look at him right side up, that's very obvious that the eyes are flipped. So when you're working with something that you don't distinguish your intention, it'll end up different than if you're working with shapes that you're recognizing. So sometimes working with shapes backwards is a easier way to not be biased by what you think you're making. So there's some word sculptures. Oh, they are also great shadow sculptures.